In the scorching heat of rural Pakistan, where ancient traditions still dictate life and death, a woman's scream echoed across the barren fields. But this wasn't a scream of childbirth or celebration. This was the desperate cry of someone buried alive, with only her head above ground, waiting to die for a crime that wasn't even a crime. Sarah Khan had committed no murder, stolen no gold, and harmed no soul. Her only sin was being unable to give her husband a child after 8 years of marriage. In a society where a woman's worth is measured by her fertility, Sarah had become worthless. Her own family had turned their backs on her. Her husband's family had branded her cursed. And, now, the village elders had pronounced their final judgment. But what they didn't know was that a dusty trail just beyond the burial ground would soon carry an unlikely savior. A man whose weathered hands had roped cattle, whose keen eyes had tracked lost animals across endless plains, and whose heart still beat with the ancient code of the American West: protect the innocent, no matter the cost. This is the true story of how one woman's darkest hour became the beginning of an extraordinary journey that would span 2 continents, challenge age-old traditions, and prove that sometimes angels wear cowboy boots and speak with a Texas drawl. The sun blazed mercilessly over the village of Karian in Punjab, Pakistan, its rays beating down on the cracked earth like hammers on an anvil. Sarah Khan felt each ray as a burning needle against her exposed scalp, the only part of her body visible above the rocky ground where she had been buried alive. Her dark hair, once her pride, now hung in matted strands around her dirt-streaked face. 8 hours had passed since the village elders had carried out their sentence. 8 hours of agony, of fighting against the packed earth that held her body prisoner from the neck down. Her arms were pinned to her sides, her legs pressed together, completely immobilized in what the locals called the final shame. The traditional punishment for a woman who had failed in her most sacred duty. Sarah's throat felt like sandpaper as she tried to swallow. The last water she had tasted was the previous evening, before Mullah Hassan had read the judgment that would end her life. Sarah Khan, wife of Rashid Khan, has proven herself barren after 8 years of marriage. She has brought shame upon her husband's family and dishonor to our village. The land itself rejects her presence. The words still echoed in her mind as she stared at the endless blue sky above. How had her life come to this? She remembered her wedding day, 18 years old and full of dreams, wearing her grandmother's red dupatta and believing that love would conquer all obstacles. Rashid had seemed kind then, promising her a good life, children to fill their home with laughter. But the laughter never came. Month after month, year after year, her body failed to give them the son every Pakistani family demanded. She had visited every doctor in 3 districts, spent their savings on treatments, prayed at countless shrines. Nothing worked. With each passing year, the whispers grew louder, the accusations more bitter. She's cursed, the village women would say when they thought she couldn't hear. A woman who cannot bear children brings bad luck to everyone around her. Rashid's mother, Begum Nazreen, made no effort to hide her hatred. She would throw Sarah's morning tea on the ground instead of serving it, would feed the house cat from Sarah's plate, would loudly pray for Allah to either bless her daughter-in-law with a child or remove the curse from their home. The second option seemed increasingly appealing to everyone involved. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. Sarah's younger sister Fatima had visited with her newborn son, her 4th child in 6 years of marriage. As Fatima nursed her baby on the same courtyard where Sarah swept daily, Begum Nazreen erupted in fury. "Look at this mockery," she screamed, pointing at Sarah with a gnarled finger. "Your own sister births sons like a blessed cow, while you remain empty as a broken pot. You have stolen the fertility that should have been yours and given it to her through jealousy and black magic." The accusation of witchcraft was the final nail in Sarah's coffin. In rural Pakistan, such charges were taken seriously, often with deadly consequences. Within days, Mullah Hassan had convened the village council. The decision was swift and unanimous. Sarah tried to turn her head to escape the sun's glare, but the movement sent shooting pains down her neck. The earth around her had been packed so tightly that even this simple motion was agony. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her tongue swollen with thirst. In the distance, she could see the mud brick houses of Karian village, their flat roofs shimmering in the heat. Smoke rose from cooking fires where other women prepared meals for their families, women whose bodies had not betrayed them, whose wounds had delivered the precious sons that Pakistani society demanded. A vulture circled overhead, its keen eyes already anticipating the feast to come. Sarah had seen these scavengers before, waiting patiently as the desert claimed its victims. She wondered how long it would take. The village elders said death usually came within 2 days, from dehydration and heatstroke. But some of the stronger ones lasted longer, they whispered with cruel satisfaction. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to summon memories of better times. Her father teaching her to read when she was 5 years old, ignoring his wife's protests that education would spoil a daughter. Her first job as a teacher in the village school, before marriage ended her career forever. The early days with Rashid, when he would bring her flowers from the roadside and promise they would build a beautiful life together. Those promises felt like lies now. When the village council had pronounced their sentence, Rashid hadn't said a single word in her defense. He had sat with his head down, occasionally nodding as the elders explained how his wife's barrenness had brought shame upon his lineage. When they asked if he agreed with the punishment, he had simply whispered Inshallah and walked away. The betrayal hurt worse than the physical agony. Sarah had loved him truly, completely, believing their marriage was blessed despite its childlessness. She had kept his house spotless, cooked his favorite meals, mended his clothes with careful stitches. She had been faithful, devoted, everything a traditional wife should be except for the one thing that mattered most. As the sun reached its zenith, the heat became unbearable. Sarah felt her consciousness beginning to slip away, the pain and thirst overwhelming her senses. She began to recite verses from the Quran that her mother had taught her as a child, the familiar words bringing a small measure of comfort in her darkest hour. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, she whispered through cracked lips. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was seeking mercy from the same God whose followers had buried her alive for failing to conceive. The village dogs had found her scent now. She could hear them barking in the distance, their calls growing closer. Soon they would come to investigate, and then, the real horror would begin. Sarah tried not to think about what would happen when the sun set and the desert predators emerged to hunt. A dust cloud appeared on the horizon, moving slowly along the old trade route that connected Carrion to the larger towns beyond. Sarah watched it with the detached interest of the dying, wondering who might be traveling through their forgotten corner of the world. Merchants perhaps, or government officials visiting the district headquarters. The dust cloud grew larger, and soon she could make out the outline of a vehicle. An old jeep, by the look of it, moving steadily but not in any great hurry. Sarah felt a flicker of hope, quickly suppressed. Even if the travelers saw her, what could they do? The village council's judgment was final, and outsiders rarely interfered in local justice. But, as the jeep drew closer, Sarah noticed something odd about its occupants. Through the heat waves, she could see that the driver wasn't wearing traditional Pakistani clothes. Instead, he seemed to be dressed in strange foreign garments, with something covering his head that looked nothing like a local turban or cap. The vehicle slowed as it approached the burial ground, then stopped completely about 50 yards away. Sarah heard doors slam and voices speaking in what sounded like English. Her heart began to race despite her weakened condition. Foreigners meant complications, but they might also mean salvation. She tried to call out, but only a harsh croak emerged from her parched throat. The visitors were walking in her direction now, and she could see them more clearly. 2 men, both tall and lean, wearing wide-brimmed hats and clothes suited for hot weather. One carried a water bottle, the other had binoculars hanging around his neck. As they came closer, Sarah could see their faces clearly for the first time. The older man had steel-gray hair and sun-weathered skin marked by years of outdoor work. His companion was younger, maybe 35, with brown hair and keen blue eyes that seemed to take in every detail of their surroundings. They spoke quietly to each other in English, their voices carrying across the still desert air. Sarah had learned some English during her teaching days, enough to understand basic conversations. She strained to hear their words, hope blooming in her chest like a flower after rain. The older man pointed directly at her, and both visitors quickened their pace. As they drew near, Sarah could see the shock and horror spreading across their faces as they realized what they were witnessing. The younger man immediately pulled out his phone and began taking pictures, while his companion knelt down beside Sarah's exposed head. "Jesus Christ," the older man whispered, his voice thick with disbelief. "What in God's name have they done to you?" Sarah looked up into his weathered face and saw something she hadn't seen in months: genuine human compassion. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, filled with an anger that wasn't directed at her but at the situation itself. When he removed his hat, she could see that his gray hair was cut short and neat, military style. "Water," Sarah managed to whisper in English, the word scraping against her raw throat like broken glass. Without hesitation, the man uncapped his water bottle and carefully held it to her lips. The liquid was the sweetest thing Sarah had ever tasted, and she drank greedily until he gently pulled the bottle away. "Easy there, miss," he said in accented English. "Too much too fast will make you sick. We're going to get you out of here." The younger man finished taking photos and knelt on Sarah's other side. "Jake, we need to call someone. The police, the embassy, somebody who can handle this legally." Jake shook his head grimly. "No time for that, son. Look at her condition. Another few hours in this heat and she'll be gone. We dig her out now and figure out the politics later." He stood up and walked back toward their jeep, returning moments later with 2 folding shovels and what looked like a first aid kit. "Ben, you start digging around her shoulders. I'll work on this side. Be careful not to hit her with the blade." As the 2 Americans began the delicate work of freeing her from her earthen prison, Sarah felt tears streaming down her face for the first time since her burial. She had given up hope, accepted that she would die alone and forgotten in this desolate place. But these strangers, these foreign men who owed her nothing, were risking their own safety to save her life. "Thank you," she whispered as Jake carefully scraped dirt away from her left shoulder. "Thank you." He paused in his digging and looked down at her with eyes full of determination. "Nobody deserves this, miss. Nobody. What's your name?" "Sarah," she replied, her voice growing stronger with each sip of water they gave her. "Sarah Khan." "Well, Sarah Khan," Jake said as he resumed digging, "my name's Jake Morrison, and this is Ben Cooper. We're from Texas, and where we come from, we don't leave people to die in holes. You're going to be okay." The rescue was slow, painstaking work. The earth had been packed around Sarah's body with deliberate care, designed to hold her securely until death claimed her. Every shovelful had to be removed with extreme caution to avoid injuring her further. Her arms were so tightly pinned that Ben worried they might be broken. As they worked, Jake asked gentle questions about what had happened to her. Sarah found herself telling these strangers things she had never spoken aloud, about the years of failure, the accusations of witchcraft, the gradual erosion of hope that had led to this moment. The 2 Americans listened without judgment, their faces growing darker with each detail. "This is medieval," Ben muttered as he carefully freed Sarah's right arm from its earthen prison. "It's like something out of the Dark Ages." Jake's jaw was set in a hard line as he worked. "Evil's the same everywhere, son. Doesn't matter if it wears a turban or a 3-piece suit. What matters is what good people do when they see it happening." After nearly an hour of careful digging, they had freed Sarah's arms and upper torso. The circulation gradually returned to her limbs, bringing with it waves of painful tingling. But she had never been so grateful for pain in her life, because it meant she was alive and free. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Jake and Ben finally freed Sarah's legs from their earthen tomb. She was weak, dehydrated, and covered in dirt, but she was alive. More importantly, she was no longer alone. Jake lifted her carefully from the hole, surprised by how light she felt in his arms. "Easy now," he murmured as Sarah swayed unsteadily. "Your body's been through hell. We need to get you somewhere safe." But, as he spoke, a dust cloud appeared on the village road. Several vehicles were approaching fast, and Sarah's heart sank as she recognized the lead car. It belonged to Mullah Hassan, and she could see armed men in the other vehicles. "They're coming," she whispered, fear creeping back into her voice. "They'll kill me for escaping. And they'll kill you for helping me." Jake set his jaw and helped Sarah into the back seat of their Jeep. "Well then," he said grimly, "I guess we better not be here when they arrive." Ben was already starting the engine as Jake climbed into the passenger seat. As their Jeep roared to life and began racing across the desert toward the main road, Sarah looked back at the hole that had almost become her grave. She was free, but freedom in Pakistan could be more dangerous than captivity. Her real ordeal was just beginning. The American cowboy who had saved her life was about to discover that rescuing someone was only the first step. Keeping them alive in a society that had already condemned them to death would require courage, cunning, and connections that stretched far beyond the dusty roads of rural Punjab. As the Jeep bounced over the rough terrain, Sarah closed her eyes and held on tight. Whatever came next, she was no longer facing it alone. For the first time in 8 years, she had hope. The Jeep's engine roared as Jake Morrison pushed the accelerator to the floor, sending up clouds of dust behind them as they raced across the barren landscape. In the side mirror, Ben Cooper could see their pursuers gaining ground, 3 vehicles filled with angry men who wouldn't hesitate to kill to preserve their village's honor. Sarah Khan huddled in the back seat, clutching the water bottle Jake had given her with shaking hands. Her body ached from hours of burial, and every bump in the rough terrain sent waves of pain through her cramped muscles. But she was alive, and that miracle was entirely due to the 2 Americans who had risked everything to save her. "How far to the main road?" Jake shouted over the engine noise, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel as he navigated around boulders and desert scrub. "Maybe 2 miles, Ben replied, checking their GPS unit while keeping one eye on the pursuit vehicles. "But, Jake, they're gaining on us. That lead car looks like it might be faster than this old Jeep." Jake's jaw tightened as he downshifted to climb a rocky incline. "Then, we better make sure they don't catch us. Sarah, you okay back there?" Sarah tried to speak but only managed a weak nod. The adrenaline of escape was wearing off, replaced by the crushing reality of what came next. Even if they reached the main road, where could they go? Her face was known throughout the district, and word of her escape would spread quickly. Traditional justice had a long reach in Pakistan, especially when it concerned family honor. "The police station in Gujarat," she finally managed to say. "It's about 20 kilometers south on the Grand Trunk Road. Inspector Malik there, he went to university. He might listen." Ben glanced back at her with concern. "Might listen? Sarah, we need someone who will definitely help." "You don't understand," Sarah replied, her voice growing stronger as the water revived her. "In villages like mine, the police usually support the elders. Modern law and traditional justice don't always agree in Pakistan. Inspector Malik is different because he studied in England, but even he has to be careful." Jake took his eyes off the terrain for a moment to study Sarah in the rearview mirror. "What exactly are we dealing with here? Who are those men chasing us?" Sarah watched the dust clouds behind them growing larger. "Mullah Hassan leads them. He's the village religious leader who pronounced my sentence. The others are men from my husband's family and village council members. To them, I'm not just an escaped prisoner. I'm a woman who has dishonored their judgment and brought shame on the entire community." "And what about your husband?" Ben asked. "Where does Rashid stand in all this?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had been trying not to think about Rashid's betrayal, the way he had sat silently as the council condemned her to death. "He agreed with their decision," she whispered. "In his mind, I stopped being his wife the moment they declared me cursed." Jake cursed under his breath as the Jeep hit a particularly rough patch of ground. "Well, he's about to learn what it means to tangle with Texas cowboys. Ben, check the map again. Any other routes we can take?" Ben studied their GPS while the Jeep bounced and lurched across the desert. "There's a railway crossing about 5 miles ahead. If we can make it there, we can follow the tracks southeast toward Lahore instead of going to Gujarat. Bigger city, more options. But also more dangerous," Sarah interjected. "Lahore has many people from this region. Someone will recognize me, and then..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. All three of them understood that her escape had made her a marked woman throughout Punjab province. The pursuing vehicles were close enough now that Sarah could see individual faces. Mullah Hassan rode in the lead car, his white beard flowing in the wind, his eyes burning with righteous anger. Behind him, she recognized her brother-in-law Ahmed and several other men who had once treated her with respect, before her barrenness made her an outcast. They're armed, Ben observed grimly, spotting rifle barrels protruding from the windows of the chase cars. Jake, these guys mean business. Jake's response was to push the jeep even harder, the engine screaming in protest as they crested a ridge and began racing down the opposite slope. Then, we better make sure they don't get close enough to use those weapons. The landscape began to change as they approached the railway line. Sparse vegetation gave way to irrigated fields, and Sarah could see farmers working their crops in the distance. The sight of other people brought both hope and terror. Witnesses might deter violence, but they might also help capture a fleeing woman. As they reached the railway crossing, Jake made a split-second decision that would change all their lives. Instead of continuing toward Lahore, he turned north along the tracks, heading toward the industrial city of Sialkot. "Why are we going this way?" Ben asked, confused by the sudden change in direction. Jake's weathered face broke into a grim smile. "Because Sialkot is where they manufacture most of Pakistan's sports equipment for export. Lots of international business, lots of foreigners coming and going. And, most importantly, it's where my old army buddy Hassan Zaidi runs a textile factory." Sarah felt a flicker of hope. "Hassan Zaidi? The industrialist? You know him?" Jake asked, surprised. "Everyone in Punjab knows of him," Sarah replied. "He's very wealthy and has connections in government. But why would he help us?" Jake's smile widened slightly as he navigated around a slow-moving freight train. "Because 20 years ago in Afghanistan, Hassan saved my life when our convoy got hit by an IED. I've been looking for a way to return the favor ever since." The pursuit cars had followed them onto the railway route, but the rocky terrain alongside the tracks was slowing them down. Jake's Jeep, designed for rough country, handled the conditions better than the sedans following them. Ben was monitoring their progress on the GPS. Sialkot's about 30 kilometers ahead. "Think we can make it?" "We better," Jake replied, glancing in the rearview mirror at Sarah's pale face. "Because I don't think our passenger can take much more of this." Sarah was indeed struggling. The combination of dehydration, exhaustion, and stress was taking its toll. She felt dizzy and nauseous, and her hands were shaking uncontrollably. But worse than the physical symptoms was the growing realization of what her rescue meant for these two kind Americans. "You should leave me," she said quietly. "Find somewhere safe and let me out. This isn't your fight, and you could be killed because of me." Jake's response was immediate and firm. "Not happening, miss. Where I come from, we finish what we start. And what we started was getting you to safety." Ben nodded in agreement, though his face showed concern as he watched their fuel gauge. "Jake, we're burning gas pretty fast. Are we going to make it to Sialkot?" Jake checked the gauge and frowned. The high-speed chase was consuming fuel at an alarming rate, and they were still 20 kilometers from their destination. "We'll make it," he said with more confidence than he felt. "We have to." As they raced through a small farming village, Sarah noticed people stopping their work to stare at the unusual convoy. The sight of foreigners being chased by armed locals would provide gossip for weeks to come, but it also meant word of their escape was spreading. By evening, every police station in the region would know about the American cowboys who had interfered with traditional justice. There, Ben pointed ahead. "I can see the outskirts of Sialkot." The industrial city sprawled before them, its smokestacks and factory buildings a welcome sight after the desperate journey across open country. But, as they entered the urban area, their pursuit vehicles seemed to gain new determination, closing the gap between hunter and prey. Jake navigated through increasingly heavy traffic, his cowboy reflexes serving him well as he dodged motorcycles, trucks, and the occasional camel cart. The chase cars had more difficulty in the congested streets, but they were still dangerously close. "The Zaidi textile complex should be in the industrial district," Jake said, scanning road signs written in both English and Urdu.
Sarah, can you help us with directions?
Sarah struggled to focus through her exhaustion and fear.
Turn right at the next traffic circle. The factory district is about 2 kilometers that way.
As they made the turn, Ben spotted something that made his blood run cold.
Jake, look ahead. There's a police checkpoint. Sure enough, 2 police cars blocked the road ahead, their occupants questioning drivers and checking identification papers.
Sarah's heart sank as she realized their escape route was about to be cut off. They must have radioed ahead, she whispered. The village has connections everywhere. Jake studied the roadblock for a moment, then made another split-second decision that showcased the military training he'd received decades earlier. Instead of approaching the checkpoint, he turned into a narrow alley between 2 factories, hoping to find an alternate route to their destination. The alley was barely wide enough for their Jeep, and Jake had to fold in the side mirrors to avoid scraping the walls. Behind them, they could hear the larger pursuit vehicles trying to follow, but the tight space was working in their favor. This is like something out of an action movie, Ben muttered as they squeezed between parked motorcycles and hanging laundry lines. Yeah, except in the movies, the good guys always have enough gas, Jake replied, watching their fuel gauge drop toward empty.
The alley opened onto a busy street in the heart of the industrial district.
Factory workers were walking home from their shifts, and the evening call to prayer echoed from nearby mosques. In different circumstances, Sarah might have found the familiar sounds comforting, but now they only reminded her how far from safety she remained.
There! Sarah pointed ahead with excitement. Zaidi Textile Complex.
The building with the green and white sign. The factory complex was larger than Jake had expected, with multiple buildings surrounded by high walls and security gates.
As they approached the main entrance, Jake could see guards checking vehicles and monitoring visitors. It looked more like a military installation than a textile factory.
Hassan always was paranoid about security, Jake muttered as he pulled up to the guard station.
Let's hope he remembers an old friend.
The security guard, a young man in a crisp uniform, approached their Jeep with professional courtesy but obvious suspicion. His English was accented but clear.
Good evening, sir. May I ask the purpose of your visit?
Jake removed his cowboy hat and extended his hand.
My name is Jake Morrison, from Texas.
I need to speak with Hassan Zaidi about an urgent matter.
Tell him it's about Afghanistan. The guard's expression changed subtly at the mention of Afghanistan.
He spoke rapidly into his radio, then gestured toward a parking area inside the compound. Please wait there, sir.
Mr. Zaidi will be informed of your arrival.
As they drove through the security gates, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. They had reached temporary safety, but she knew the men pursuing them wouldn't give up easily. Traditional honor demanded her death, and they would wait outside these walls for as long as necessary to claim it. Ben was scanning their surroundings, noting the security cameras and additional guards positioned around the complex.
This place is like a fortress. Your friend Hassan doesn't take any chances.
In his business, he can't afford to, Jake replied.
Pakistan's a complicated place for successful entrepreneurs.
They have to deal with threats from competitors, criminals, and sometimes even their own government.
A well-dressed man emerged from the main building and walked briskly toward their Jeep.
He was tall and distinguished, with graying hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. As he approached, his face broke into a wide smile of recognition.
Jake Morrison. Hassan Zaidi called out in perfect English. You crazy cowboy, what are you doing in my country?
Jake climbed out of the Jeep and embraced his old friend warmly.
Hassan, I need your help. We've got a situation that could get us all killed if we're not careful. Hassan's expression grew serious as he noticed Sarah huddled in the back seat and the dust covering their vehicle. What kind of situation, my friend? Before Jake could answer, the sound of engines announced the arrival of their pursuers.
3 cars had pulled up outside the factory gates, and armed men were stepping out to confront the security guards. Hassan noticed the commotion and immediately understood the gravity of their situation.
Get your people inside, quickly, he ordered. We'll discuss this in my office where we can speak privately.
As they hurried toward the main building, Sarah looked back at the gates where Mullah Hassan and his followers were arguing with the security guards. She had escaped burial alive, but she was far from free. The real test of her American rescuers' courage was about to begin, and she prayed their friendship with Hassan Zaidi would be strong enough to protect them all from the storm that was coming. The cowboy who had saved her from a living grave was about to learn that in Pakistan, some battles required more than quick thinking and faster vehicles. They required connections, money, and the kind of political maneuvering that could determine whether Sarah Khan lived to see another sunrise. Hassan Zaidi's office occupied the top floor of the Zaidi textile complex, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Sialkot's industrial district. The room itself reflected its owner's success: rich mahogany furniture, Persian rugs, and walls lined with photographs showing Hassan meeting with government officials, foreign dignitaries, and business leaders from around the world. Sarah Khan sat in a plush leather chair, still wearing the dirt-stained clothes from her burial, feeling utterly out of place in such opulent surroundings. A company nurse had checked her vital signs and provided clean water and electrolyte drinks, but nothing could wash away the trauma of the past day or the terror of what might still come. Jake Morrison stood by the window, his withered hands clasped behind his back as he watched the crowd of angry villagers gathering outside the factory gates. Hassan's security team had locked down the complex, but everyone in the room knew this was only a temporary solution. "Tell me everything," Hassan said quietly, settling behind his desk as Ben Cooper finished explaining how they had discovered Sarah buried alive in the desert. "Leave out no details, no matter how disturbing." As Sarah recounted her story, Hassan's expression grew darker with each revelation. He had spent 20 years building his business empire, creating jobs for thousands of Pakistanis while maintaining delicate relationships with both traditional leaders and modern authorities. This situation threatened to upset that careful balance. "The accusation of witchcraft changes everything," Hassan said when Sarah finished her account. "If this were simply a matter of family dispute or even honor killing, we might find legal remedies. But when village elders invoke religious law and claim supernatural causes, the authorities become reluctant to intervene." Jake turned from the window, his steel gray eyes flashing with anger. "Are you saying there's nothing we can do? That we should have left her to die in that hole?" "Of course not," Hassan replied firmly. "But we must understand what we're facing before we can formulate a response. That crowd outside isn't just Sarah's family seeking revenge. They represent a traditional power structure that has governed rural Pakistan for centuries. To them, our interference challenges their fundamental authority." Ben had been monitoring news reports on his laptop, and his findings weren't encouraging. "Hassan, this story is already spreading on social media. Videos from the village, interviews with the elders. They're portraying Sarah as a dangerous woman who used black magic to curse her husband's family." Sarah felt fresh tears burning her eyes. "Then, it's hopeless. Even if we escape Sialkot, everyone in Pakistan will know my face. I'll never be safe anywhere." Hassan stood up and walked to a wall map of Pakistan, studying the provinces and cities marked with colored pins representing his business interests. "Not hopeless," he said thoughtfully. "Difficult, yes. Dangerous, certainly. But not hopeless. I have resources, connections, and, most importantly, I owe Jake Morrison a debt that can never truly be repaid." He turned back to face the group, his expression resolute. 20 years ago in Afghanistan, Jake carried me 3 kilometers through enemy territory after an IED blast shattered my leg. He saved my life when he could have easily left me behind to save himself. This is my chance to return that favor. What are you proposing?" Jake asked, though his tone suggested he was prepared for anything. Hassan returned to his desk and opened a secure laptop computer. "First, we need to get Sarah out of Pakistan entirely. My textile business requires frequent travel to international markets. I can arrange diplomatic passports and safe passage, but it will take time." "How much time?" Ben asked, glancing toward the window where more vehicles had joined the crowd outside. 48 hours minimum," Hassan replied. "I need to contact people in Islamabad, make certain arrangements. But Sarah cannot stay here that long. My factory is secure, but it's not designed to withstand a prolonged siege by angry villagers supported by religious authorities. Sarah looked up from her chair, confusion evident in her exhausted eyes.
Where would I go? Even in Islamabad, people would recognize me now.
Hassan smiled for the first time since they'd arrived.
Not necessarily. I have a safe house in the Margala Hills outside the capital.
It's where I take foreign business partners who need privacy during sensitive negotiations.
Completely isolated, fully staffed with people I trust absolutely. Jake nodded approvingly. Sounds good. How do we get her there without being followed?
That's where things become complicated, Hassan admitted.
The road between here and Islamabad passes through several districts where traditional authorities hold sway.
They'll have checkpoints watching for Sarah, probably with police cooperation. Ben closed his laptop and focused on the conversation.
What about flying?
Surely your connections could get us on a private plane.
Hassan shook his head. All airports are being monitored.
Word has reached the media that foreign nationals aided in Sarah's escape.
The government is under pressure to demonstrate that Pakistan respects traditional values while also protecting international visitors. They're walking a political tightrope. A knock on the office door interrupted their planning.
Hassan's security chief, a large man named Tariq, entered with a grim expression.
Sir, we have developments outside. Mullah Hassan has been joined by 2 members of the Provincial Assembly and a representative from the Religious Affairs Ministry. They're demanding that we surrender the woman immediately. Hassan cursed under his breath. Political involvement already. That's faster than I expected.
He looked at Jake with concern. My friend, this situation is escalating beyond what my resources can handle alone. We need additional support.
Jake's weathered face set in determined lines. What kind of support?
The kind that comes with diplomatic immunity, Hassan replied.
Your embassy in Islamabad needs to know about this situation immediately. If Sarah is officially under American protection, it changes the entire dynamic. Sarah felt a surge of hope followed immediately by crushing doubt. But, I'm not American. Why would your embassy help a Pakistani woman who broke her own country's laws?
Ben looked up from his phone, where he'd been researching international law.
Actually, Sarah, you might have more rights than you realize.
Pakistan is a signatory to several international treaties regarding women's rights and religious persecution.
Being buried alive for childlessness would qualify as torture under UN definitions. Hassan nodded enthusiastically. Exactly.
If we can frame this as a human rights issue rather than internal Pakistani politics, we create legal grounds for international intervention.
Jake was already reaching for his satellite phone. I know people at the embassy.
Military attaché named Colonel Rodriguez who owes me a few favors.
But, Hassan, can you keep everyone safe here while I make some calls? For now, yes, Hassan replied. But, Jake, we cannot wait long.
Every hour increases the pressure on local authorities to storm this compound and retrieve Sarah. My security team is good, but they're not equipped for a full-scale confrontation. As if to emphasize his point, the sound of chanting began to drift up from the street below. Sarah moved to the window and saw that the crowd had grown significantly, with more than 100 people now surrounding the factory complex. Many carried signs written in Urdu, and some were burning effigies of what appeared to be a female figure.
They're calling me Shaitan, Sarah whispered, using the Urdu word for devil. They believe I've corrupted these foreign men with evil magic.
Ben joined her at the window, his face grave as he witnessed the growing mob.
Hassan, how long can your security hold them back? Hassan consulted with Tariq in rapid Urdu, then turned back to the group. Tariq says we have perhaps 6 hours before the pressure becomes overwhelming.
The local police are trying to maintain order, but they're sympathetic to the crowd's demands.
Eventually, they'll be forced to take action.
Jake finished dialing his satellite phone and stepped away from the group to speak privately. His conversation was brief but intense, conducted in the clipped military language of professionals discussing life and death situations. When he returned, his expression was cautiously optimistic. Colonel Rodriguez is driving up from Islamabad tonight with a small team. They'll be here by dawn, but they can only provide limited protection.
The embassy's position is that they cannot directly interfere with Pakistani internal affairs unless Sarah formally requests asylum.
Sarah felt the weight of decisions settling on her shoulders. Requesting asylum would mean admitting she could never return to Pakistan, never see her family again, never walk the streets where she'd grown up. But the alternative was death, either from the mob outside or from future attempts to enforce traditional justice.
If I request asylum, she asked quietly, what happens then? Hassan consulted his laptop, pulling up information about international refugee procedures.
The American embassy would conduct interviews, verify your story, and determine whether you qualify for protection under U.S. law.
The process typically takes several weeks. Weeks? Ben exclaimed. Hassan, we don't have weeks. We might not have hours.
Which is why we need an interim solution, Hassan replied calmly. Something to buy time while the formal asylum process moves forward. Jake was studying the map again, his military mind working through tactical problems.
What about a diversion? Something to draw attention away from this location while we move Sarah somewhere safer? Hassan's eyes lit up with understanding.
My brother owns a trucking company that ships textiles throughout the region. We could create a convoy, multiple vehicles leaving at different times and directions.
The crowd would have to split their attention.
But they'd still know to watch the roads, Ben pointed out.
Any vehicle leaving here would be suspect.
Sarah had been listening to the planning with growing anxiety, feeling like a burden that might get these good men killed.
Perhaps I should surrender myself, she said quietly. Face whatever judgment awaits me.
These people saved my life, and now they're risking their own because of me. The room fell silent at her words. Jake turned from the map and looked at her with the same expression he'd worn when finding her buried in the desert, a mixture of compassion and absolute determination. Sarah Khan, he said firmly, I didn't dig you out of that hole so you could give up now. We're going to get you to safety, and we're going to make sure you have a chance at a real life.
That's not negotiable.
Hassan stood up and began pacing, his business mind working through possibilities.
There might be another option.
I have a facility in Lahore, a warehouse where we store finished goods for export. It's large enough to hide vehicles, and it has underground sections that weren't included in the original building plans.
A smuggler's hideout? Ben asked with interest.
Hassan smiled grimly. Let's call it an insurance policy against unstable political situations.
Sometimes valuable cargo needs to disappear temporarily until circumstances improve.
The facility has provisions for extended stays and secure communications.
Jake nodded approvingly. How do we reach it without being spotted?
That's where the diversion becomes crucial, Hassan explained. We create multiple movements from this facility while the actual escape uses a route they won't expect. My warehouse has a rail siding for shipping containers. If we can reach it, Sarah could be transported to Karachi inside a container destined for the port. Sarah felt hope stirring again, despite the complexity of the plan.
And, from Karachi?
My shipping company has regular routes to Dubai, Hassan replied. From there, connections to anywhere in the world. But, first, we have to survive the next few hours and reach the Lahore warehouse. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of the crowd outside grew louder and more aggressive. Tariq appeared in the doorway again, his expression urgent. Sir, the situation is deteriorating rapidly. Someone threw stones at our front gate, and the police are warning that they may not be able to maintain order much longer. Hassan looked at his assembled guests, knowing that their time for planning was running out. My friends, he said solemnly, I believe we have reached the point where we must act, regardless of whether our preparations are complete.
Every minute we delay increases the danger to all of us.
Jake checked his weapons, a habit from his military days, then looked at each person in the room.
Sarah, you still have a choice. This is going to be dangerous, and there's no guarantee we'll succeed. You can still change your mind.
Sarah Khan stood up from her chair, her legs unsteady but her voice strong.
Mr. Morrison, you asked me earlier what my name was.
I told you Sarah Khan, but that's not complete.
My full name is Sarah Khan Morrison.
The room fell silent in confusion until she continued. In my village, women sometimes take the name of a man who has saved their life, to honor the debt they can never repay.
You have given me a new life, so I take your name to remember it.
And Sarah Khan Morrison does not surrender to evil, no matter how many people support it. Jake's weathered face broke into a broad smile. Well then, Sarah Khan Morrison, let's go show these folks what Texas cowboys can do when they're properly motivated. As Hassan began implementing their escape plan and the crowd outside grew more restless, none of them knew that their actions were about to trigger a chain of events that would reshape international relations between the United States and Pakistan, create a new model for protecting women refugees, and turn an unknown village woman into a symbol of courage recognized around the world. The cowboy who had rescued her from a living grave was about to discover that sometimes the hardest part of being a hero isn't the rescue itself, but everything that comes after. The escape began at 3 a.m, during the darkest hour before dawn, when the crowd outside Hassan Zady's textile complex had thinned to a few dozen determined watchers. The first phase of their plan had worked perfectly. A convoy of delivery trucks leaving the facility at 15-minute intervals had drawn most of the protesters away as they followed each vehicle, hoping to spot their quarry. Sarah Khan Morrison crouched in the back of a modified shipping container, its interior fitted with basic living quarters for exactly this type of emergency. Jake Morrison sat beside her, checking his equipment one final time, while Ben Cooper monitored communications from a laptop connected to Hassan's secure satellite network.
Phase 1 complete, Hassan's voice crackled through their radio. All decoy vehicles have successfully drawn pursuit away from the facility. You have a clean window for the next 40 minutes.
Their container was mounted on a specialized truck designed to look like routine commercial transport. The driver, one of Hassan's most trusted employees named Omar, had been running these covert operations for 5 years without ever being caught. His cargo manifest listed machine parts destined for Hassan's Lahore warehouse, nothing that would attract official attention. As the truck pulled out of the facility's rear gate, Sarah felt her heart pounding against her ribs. She had never been outside Punjab province, and the idea of traveling to Lahore in a hidden compartment felt like something from a spy movie. But the alternative was a return to the burial ground, and she had no intention of giving her enemies that satisfaction.
How long until we reach the warehouse? Jake asked Omar through their communication system.
4 hours if traffic is normal, Omar replied.
But I'm taking back roads to avoid police checkpoints. Could be 6 hours, maybe more.
Ben was monitoring news feeds on his laptop, and his expression grew troubled as he read the latest reports.
Guys, this story is going international. BBC World Service just ran a segment about American tourists interfering with Pakistani justice.
The U.S. Embassy is under pressure to explain their citizens' actions.
Jake grimaced at the news.
That could work for us or against us, depending on how it's spun.
What's the official embassy position? Still developing, Ben replied.
But Colonel Rodriguez sent a coded message saying political winds are shifting rapidly.
The State Department wants this resolved quietly, but human rights groups are demanding action.
Sarah listened to this exchange with growing unease. I'm causing an international incident, she said quietly.
Maybe it would be better if I just don't even finish that thought, Jake interrupted firmly. You didn't ask to be buried alive, and you didn't ask us to rescue you.
But now that we're all in this together, we see it through to the end. The truck hit a particularly rough patch of road, and Sarah was grateful for the padding Hassan had installed in their hiding place. Through the small ventilation system, she could smell the dust and diesel fumes of rural Pakistan, familiar scents that now seemed strange and foreign after everything that had happened. Omar, status report, Hassan's voice came through the radio.
Approaching the first checkpoint outside Sialkot, Omar replied.
3 police vehicles and what looks like a military escort.
They're checking every truck. Sarah's blood ran cold. They know about the container. Someone must have informed them. Jake was already reaching for his satellite phone. Not necessarily.
This could be routine security, or they might be checking for stolen goods.
Either way, we need contingency plans.
Ben pulled up satellite maps on his laptop. There's a railroad crossing about 2 kilometers ahead.
If we can reach it, there's an alternate route through agricultural areas that bypasses the checkpoint entirely. Omar, you copy that? Jake asked. Copy. I see the crossing. But, if I deviate from my registered route, it will raise questions later when they check GPS records.
Hassan's voice crackled through the static.
Take the deviation. I'll handle any administrative questions afterward. Your cargo's safety is the priority.
The truck slowed and, then, turned onto a narrow farm road that paralleled the railway tracks. Sarah could hear Omar muttering prayers under his breath as he navigated the unfamiliar terrain. The road was barely wide enough for their vehicle, and overhanging branches scraped against the container's roof.
Movement ahead, Omar reported. Looks like a village patrol. 3 men with motorcycles, setting up their own checkpoint. Jake peered through the container's periscope system and cursed. Those aren't regular police. Traditional enforcement, probably looking for reward money.
The truck slowed to a stop, and they could hear voices speaking in Punjabi outside. Sarah translated in whispers. They're asking Omar about his cargo and destination. They want to inspect the container. Ben was already typing rapid messages to Hassan while Jake checked his equipment. If their hiding place was discovered, they would have to fight their way out, and the odds weren't encouraging.
Omar's telling them the container is sealed for customs inspection in Lahore, Sarah continued translating. He's showing them official papers. They're arguing about authority to open sealed cargo.
The conversation outside grew heated, with more voices joining the discussion. Sarah could hear footsteps circling their container, and the sound of someone tapping on the metal walls. They suspect something, she whispered. One of them says the container sounds hollow.
Jake made a quick decision.
He activated their emergency beacon, sending a coded signal to Hassan that would trigger the next phase of their escape plan. Within minutes, Omar's radio crackled with an urgent message.
Priority directive from Sialkot headquarters, Hassan's voice announced with official authority.
Container 7749 is carrying sensitive diplomatic materials under American embassy seal. Any interference with this shipment will be reported to federal authorities immediately. The bluff was audacious, but it worked.
Sarah heard rapid conversation outside, then footsteps retreating toward the motorcycles.
Within minutes, their truck was moving again, having passed the impromptu checkpoint without inspection. Hassan, you beautiful genius, Jake breathed into the radio. That was perfect timing.
Don't celebrate yet, Hassan replied.
I just made this an official diplomatic matter.
If anyone checks with the actual embassy, we'll be exposed within hours.
The remainder of their journey to Lahore passed without major incident, though they encountered 2 more checkpoints that accepted Omar's official documentation without question. By mid-morning, they were approaching the industrial outskirts of Pakistan's cultural capital, a sprawling metropolis of 12 million people where it was easier to disappear. Hassan's warehouse occupied several acres in a district zoned for textile manufacturing, surrounded by similar facilities that provided perfect camouflage for their activities. As Omar guided their truck through the facility's security gates, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension about what came next. The warehouse interior was larger than she had expected, with rows of shipping containers stacked 3 high and industrial equipment positioned throughout the space. But Hassan had been correct about the underground sections. A hydraulic lift lowered their container into a basement level that didn't appear on any official building plans.
Welcome to my insurance policy, Hassan said as he greeted them in the underground facility.
This level has independent power, communication systems, and supplies for extended stays.
It's completely isolated from the main warehouse operations.
Sarah stepped out of the container on unsteady legs, still weak from her ordeal but amazed by the sophistication of Hassan's hidden facility. The basement had been converted into a comfortable living space with bedrooms, a kitchen, communication center, and what appeared to be a medical clinic.
How many people know about this place?
Ben asked, clearly impressed by the setup. Fewer than 10, all of whom have excellent reasons to keep it secret, Hassan replied.
This facility has saved several lives over the years, though never in circumstances quite like these.
Jake was studying maps of the region, already planning their next move.
How long can we stay here safely?
Several weeks if necessary, Hassan answered.
But, I'm hoping we won't need that long.
Colonel Rodriguez is driving up from Islamabad this afternoon with diplomatic documentation that could resolve this entire situation. Sarah sank into a comfortable chair, the first real furniture she'd experienced since her rescue.
What kind of documentation? Hassan consulted messages on his secure phone.
Temporary asylum papers, pending formal review by immigration authorities. If the paperwork is accepted, you would have legal protection while your case is processed through proper channels.
And, if it's rejected? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer.
Jake turned from his maps with a determined expression. Then, we go to Plan B. Hassan's shipping connections reach every major port in the world. We'll find somewhere that recognizes your right to exist without being buried alive for circumstances beyond your control. Ben had been monitoring international news feeds, and his findings were encouraging.
Sarah, this story is generating massive support online. Human rights organizations around the world are calling for your protection.
You're becoming a symbol for women trapped in similar situations.
The irony wasn't lost on Sarah.
For 8 years, she had felt invisible, worthless, a burden to everyone around her. Now her story was being read by millions of people, and her survival had become an international cause. I never wanted to be a symbol, she said quietly. I just wanted to live quietly and raise children who would remember me with love. Hassan sat down across from her, his expression compassionate.
Sometimes history chooses us rather than the reverse.
Your courage in surviving that ordeal has inspired people around the world.
Women facing similar persecution now have hope that escape is possible.
A soft chime from the communication system indicated an incoming secure message.
Hassan read it quickly, then looked up with excitement.
Colonel Rodriguez has arrived in Lahore.
He's requesting immediate meeting to finalize asylum documentation. Jake checked his watch. How soon can he get here?
1 hour, Hassan replied. His convoy is being escorted by Pakistani military intelligence, which suggests high-level government cooperation.
This could be the breakthrough we've been hoping for.
As they prepared for the crucial meeting that would determine Sarah's future, none of them realized they were about to become part of a larger story that would reshape how the international community responds to traditional persecution of women. The cowboy who had refused to let a woman die in a hole was about to discover that sometimes one act of courage can change the world. But, first, they had to survive the next few hours and convince skeptical diplomats that a rural Pakistani woman deserved the protection of the most powerful nation on earth. The underground railroad that had carried her to safety was about to deliver her to the most important meeting of her life. The question that remained was whether Sarah Khan Morrison was ready to speak for all the women who couldn't speak for themselves. Her answer would determine not just her own fate, but the future of countless others trapped in similar circumstances around the world. Colonel Maria Rodriguez stepped out of the armored diplomatic vehicle into Hassan Zady's hidden warehouse facility, her crisp military uniform marking her as someone accustomed to handling international crises. Behind her came 2 State Department officials and a representative from the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, their presence indicating the extraordinary level of attention Sarah's case had generated. Sarah Khan Morrison sat in the underground conference room, wearing clean clothes provided by Hassan's staff but still bearing the emotional scars of her ordeal. 3 days had passed since Jake Morrison had pulled her from that desert grave, 3 days that had transformed her from an unknown village woman into the focal point of international diplomatic discussions. Ms. Khan, Colonel Rodriguez began, settling into a chair across from Sarah while her colleagues arranged their documentation. I've read the preliminary reports about your situation, but I need to hear your story directly from you. The decisions made in this room will affect not just your future, but the precedent for how my government responds to similar cases worldwide. Sarah looked around the room at the faces watching her. Jake Morrison sat to her right, his weathered presence a constant reminder that good people still existed in a world that had shown her mostly cruelty. Ben Cooper had his laptop open, ready to document everything for the legal record. Hassan Zaidi maintained his position as host and protector, while the American officials prepared to make judgments that could determine whether she lived or died.
"Where would you like me to begin?"
Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "Start with your marriage," Colonel Rodriguez replied gently. "Help us understand how you reached the point where village elders decided burial was an appropriate punishment." For the next hour, Sarah recounted her story in detail. The arranged marriage to Rashid Khan, their years of trying to conceive, the gradual deterioration of her position within the family and community. She described the mounting pressure, the accusations of witchcraft, and, finally, the trial that had condemned her to death. The UN representative, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, interrupted occasionally to ask clarifying questions about Pakistani law and traditional practices.
"Miss Khan, in your understanding, how common are punishments like this for women who cannot bear children?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "More common than the outside world realizes, Dr. Chen.
Most cases never become public because there are no witnesses, no one willing to interfere. I survived only because these American men happened to be traveling past the burial ground." Colonel Rodriguez exchanged glances with her State Department colleagues.
"Ms. Khan, if we grant you asylum in the United States, you understand that you could never safely return to Pakistan?
Your family, your entire previous life would be lost forever." The weight of that reality hit Sarah like a physical blow.
"I understand, Colonel.
But my previous life was already lost the moment they decided I was worthless. At least in America, I might have the chance to build a new life where a woman's value isn't determined solely by her ability to produce children."
Jake Morrison spoke up for the first time during the formal interview. "Colonel, I've spent 3 days with Sarah, seen her courage under impossible circumstances. She's exactly the kind of person America should be proud to welcome."
"I appreciate your perspective, Mr. Morrison," Colonel Rodriguez replied diplomatically.
"But my government has to consider the broader implications.
If we intervene in this case, we set a precedent that could strain our relationship with Pakistan.
There are millions of women in similar circumstances worldwide. We cannot save them all."
Dr. Chen leaned forward, her expression intense.
"Actually, Colonel, that's exactly why this case is so important. Sarah's situation has generated unprecedented international attention.
Her asylum approval would send a clear message that the global community will not tolerate the burial of women for reproductive failure." Hassan Zaidi had been listening quietly, but now he activated his laptop and projected news feeds onto the conference room wall.
"Perhaps you should see what's happening outside this room," he said.
The screens filled with images from around the world, protests outside Pakistani embassies, vigils for Sarah's survival, women's rights demonstrations demanding action. Social media hashtags like #SaveSarah and #NeverBuriedAlive were trending globally, with celebrities and politicians adding their voices to the cause.
"This is no longer just about one woman," Hassan continued. "Sarah has become a symbol. How America responds will be watched by every oppressed woman on earth." Ben Cooper looked up from his laptop. "Hassan's right. I've been monitoring international reaction. The British Parliament is debating emergency legislation about protecting women refugees. The European Union is considering sanctions against countries that permit gender-based violence. Sarah's story has triggered a global conversation about women's rights." Colonel Rodriguez studied the news feeds with obvious concern. "The political pressure is certainly significant.
But foreign policy decisions cannot be based solely on public sentiment." One of the State Department officials, a middle-aged woman named Janet Walsh, spoke for the first time.
"Colonel, I've been consulting with Washington throughout this process. The Secretary of State believes this case presents an opportunity to demonstrate American leadership on human rights issues. The President has expressed personal interest in the outcome."
Sarah felt hope rising in her chest, but she forced herself to remain cautious. Politicians made promises easily and broke them just as quickly when circumstances changed.
Dr. Chen was reviewing documents on her tablet. "Ms. Khan, I've prepared a preliminary assessment based on UN refugee protocols.
Your case meets all criteria for persecution based on gender, religion, and membership in a particular social group.
I will be recommending full refugee protection through our agency.
The formal presentation continued for another hour, covering legal procedures, security arrangements, and the logistics of potential relocation to the United States. Sarah listened with growing amazement as these powerful officials discussed reshaping her entire existence with the stroke of a pen. "There is one final matter," Colonel Rodriguez said as the meeting neared its conclusion. "Ms. Khan, if we approve your asylum request, you would have an opportunity to speak publicly about your experience.
Your story could help other women in similar circumstances. Would you be willing to become an advocate for this cause?"
Sarah looked at Jake Morrison, remembering his words about finishing what they had started.
"Colonel, 3 days ago I was buried alive for failing to meet other people's expectations. Today I sit in this room because 2 Americans refused to let me die alone. If my survival can prevent even one other woman from suffering that fate, then I will speak as loudly and as often as necessary."
Colonel Rodriguez smiled for the first time since arriving.
"Ms. Khan, I believe that's exactly the answer we hope to hear."
The asylum approval process took 6 more hours of documentation, medical examinations, and security interviews. By evening, Sarah held official papers granting her temporary protected status in the United States, pending formal immigration hearings that would determine her permanent status. As the diplomatic convoy prepared to transport her to Islamabad for processing and travel arrangements, Sarah took a moment to thank the people who had saved her life. Hassan Zaidi would face questioning from Pakistani authorities about his role in her escape, but his business connections and charitable reputation provided significant protection. Ben Cooper had decided to remain in Pakistan as a journalist, documenting similar cases of gender-based persecution for international media. "Sarah," he said as they prepared to say goodbye, "your story is just the beginning.
There are thousands of women who need the same courage you've shown."
The most difficult farewell was with Jake Morrison. The weathered cowboy who had refused to let her die had become the closest thing to family she had left in the world. "Mr. Morrison," she began, but he interrupted with a gentle smile.
"Sarah, you took my name to honor what happened between us. That makes you family now.
And family looks out for each other, no matter how far apart we might be." He handed her a small object wrapped in cloth. When she opened it, she found a silver bracelet engraved with a simple message: "Never buried, never forgotten." "That's from my grandmother's jewelry collection," Jake explained. "She wore it through the Great Depression, World War II, every hardship life threw at her. It's for strong women who refuse to give up, no matter what the world does to them." Sarah hugged him fiercely, this unlikely savior who had changed her fate with simple human decency.
"I will never forget what you did for me. Never."
The journey to her new life began that night, in a diplomatic convoy traveling through the darkness toward Islamabad International Airport. As the lights of Lahore faded behind them, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had transformed her from a condemned woman into an international symbol of survival and hope. 6 months later, Sarah Khan Morrison stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York, addressing an audience of world leaders about the plight of women facing traditional persecution. She had learned English rapidly, driven by determination to speak for those who had no voice. 3 years ago, she told the assembled delegates, "I was buried alive for the crime of being childless. I survived because 2 American men refused to accept that any human being deserved such treatment. Today, I stand before you not as a victim, but as proof that courage and compassion can overcome even the most ancient evils." The speech, broadcast globally, inspired the creation of the Morrison Protocol, an international agreement establishing procedures for protecting women fleeing gender-based persecution. More than 40 countries signed the initial accord, creating a network of safe havens for women in desperate circumstances. Jake Morrison watched the speech from his ranch in Texas, proud of the woman who had taken his name and transformed it into a symbol of hope. The cowboy who had saved one woman's life had inadvertently helped save thousands more.
Sarah's new life in America was not without challenges.
She struggled with English, with unfamiliar customs, with the trauma of her near-death experience. But she also discovered opportunities she had never imagined: education, career choices, the freedom to make decisions about her own future. She eventually became an American citizen, earned a degree in international relations, and founded the Never Buried Foundation, an organization that helps women escape traditional persecution worldwide. The foundation's headquarters in Dallas, Texas, bears a plaque honoring Jake Morrison as the cowboy who started it all. But, perhaps most importantly, Sarah learned that her worth as a human being was not determined by her ability to bear children or meet society's expectations. She was valuable simply because she existed, because she had survived, because she refused to let others define her destiny. On quiet evenings in her apartment overlooking the Dallas skyline, Sarah would touch the silver bracelet Jake had given her and remember the moment when a stranger's compassion had pulled her from a living grave. The woman who had been buried for being childless had given birth to a global movement that continued to save lives around the world. The cowboy's rescue had changed everything, just as the title promised. But the real miracle wasn't the rescue itself. The real miracle was what happened afterward, when one woman's survival became a beacon of hope for millions of others trapped in similar darkness. Sarah Con Morrison had been buried alive for her failures. She had risen from that grave to become proof that no woman should ever be buried for circumstances beyond her control. And, in that transformation, both the victim and her rescuer had discovered that sometimes the most important battles are won not with guns or armies, but with simple human decency and the courage to act when action is needed most. The story that began with burial in Pakistani soil had ended with new life blooming in American freedom. And, somewhere in Texas, an old cowboy smiled knowing that sometimes angels really do wear cowboy boots and speak with determination that can move mountains.